Are you familiar with the latest technologies and trends? How will new emerging tech change our lives and the way we do business? Want to find out who's winning the clash between technology and humanity? Learn about the potential of Generation Z. Recognize the collaboration opportunities from the new reality. Embrace your new digital identity. Top experts and visionaries will disclose how they see the future. Sit back and discover the 360 degrees of disruption happening around us.
Coming up, very important, if you're listening in and you're listening and going, that sounds interesting, but I'm not so sure, write that in the comments, because after every single talk, we have Q&A sessions planned. So use this opportunity. You know, with opportunity comes responsibility, and we think you're all responsible people. So no pressure on you, but I'm expecting a lot of good questions and interested questions. So we've got several topics coming up today: technology, society, collaboration, mobility, and identity. But we're going to start with technology. And for this, we have someone who's going to look ahead. He's a futurist, a speaker, a thinker, an author, and an entrepreneur. No pressure, but I think this talk is going to be really, really good. Welcome on stage, Gerd Leonhard. And here he is, live and in color and about to look into the future. Hello, Gerd. The stage is yours.
Thanks very much. Great pleasure to be with you today. First of all, I want to say congratulations for this great event. You've pulled this off in a very short time, and God knows it's not easy to pull off a digital event like this with all the context. So that's really great. Well done. I think this is the future. Clearly of events, conferences. Yeah, I used to do 100 a year, and now I'm at home looking at the camera. So the future is different than we could ever have imagined. I think you could in fact say that the future is less certain than at any time before, at least in the sort of last 30, 40 years. And that creates a new sort of pressure around this. I think that when we're looking at the future, I think it's quite clear that we have to say that, you know, it's important that the future can only be created. It cannot actually be predicted. You know, so what I do with you today is not predicting the future. Some people have done that in the past, like Asimov and others. But I talk about how we can create this future together. Also very important, I think, when we talk about the future of what we want to be and what we can be, it's important to realize that the future is in our heads. You know, it's not tomorrow. You know, the future is not a time frame. It's a mindset. It's a way of that we think about what we want and what we want to create. Right? And the other thing I think it's really important when we talk about the future, and I'll put a different background here for that reason. You know, when we think about the future and what we want to be, when we talk about technology, I wrote a book about 4 years ago called Technology versus Humanity. And really what the title should have been is Technology with Humanity, or Humanity on top of technology. But it's important to realize, you know, the last 4 years have been a tremendous boom in technology. And especially the last couple of weeks, months, of course, you know, technology comes out as the winner from the COVID-19 crisis. And to that, I want to say that technology can do great things, but it does not want to do great things. It doesn't want to do anything. I'm paraphrasing Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, about half a year ago at the European Commission, when he talked about what technology is. Let's keep this in mind, right? Technology can do great things, but somebody has to decide what those great things are, right? It's not going to be as easy as saying, well, technology will fix all our problems. I think that's kind of a far-fetched thing. Let me start here with Milton Friedman. He said, only a crisis, real or perceived, and ours is real, right, produces real change. And when that change occurs, it's important what kind of ideas are lying around. And God knows we're in a crisis, right? We're in a global crisis. This crisis is also a gigantic opportunity, as are most crises, of course, are opportunities. Right? But in terms of what we're going to be doing in our future, I mean, think about tourism, think about traveling, think about all of the things that that we have looked at in the past. I mean, it's quite clear that we need to have the right kind of ideas lying around. I'll talk about that and why I think technology and humanity is such a key topic. Many of us are looking at the world like this now, right? Everything is digital. We're going online. We're meeting everyone through this lens here, rather than going in person, where we're keeping our distance physically, but digitally we are connecting. We're hyper-connected. We're moving to the world of 5G. Everything is about data. The data companies are the oil companies. I'll talk more about that in a little while. And this brings up all kinds of responsibilities, right? It brings up all kinds of ideas about, how we're going to be connecting and how much connection do we need, right? Is there such a thing as too much data, right? Is there such a thing as being over-connected? And, I sometimes say basically that, we're looking at this future saying everything is going to be connected. That's great. But I think being too much connected, being over-connected can be just as bad as being disconnected. Right? I talked about this in my book when I talk about digital obesity, how we're getting physically and mentally fat, so to speak, from having too much connection, right? And having too much input from data. I think in the end, humans are not machines. Many people would argue that point. You'd be surprised. So data is one thing that we use a lot of, but we don't really decide our lives based on data. I mean, you don't marry your husband or your wife because of some data stream or efficiency or optimized outcome or so. This is completely different. Our world is not like this. It's not just zeros and ones. And this is the important part about humans. We are not binary. It's not just yes or no. Humans are maybe, and we change our mind, we make mistakes, we go in between the zeros and ones. That's very difficult for a computer to do. And I think we have to be very careful about this concept that I call reductionism, that everything is about quantifiable data. I mean, it's really interesting. There's a great book from Stuart Russell, who is the master of AI teaching and great guy at UC Berkeley. His latest book, it's called Human Compatible. He talks about artificial intelligence. And one point that he makes is that a lot of machines don't understand context. They have absolute zeros or ones. So when you tell the AI or a robot to get you a coffee, it does not know that you mean you'd like a coffee if possible, but you don't want a coffee, going over dead bodies if you have to be, right? There are other priorities, there are context. I think this is very, very important that we don't take the path towards dehumanization just because data is so cruel. And we can see that in so many aspects of our lives, data running things, and especially now during the COVID crisis, surveillance data is everything. Right? Tracking, tracing, is security more important than freedom? Well, that's not an absolute question. I'll talk more about that shortly, but clearly that's something we got to think about. When we think about our future heading this way, machines are going to get smart. I mean, artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor is it really intelligent yet. But in the near future, we can count on machines being able to do things that we used to do. And that goes pretty much for any routine, anything with logic, anything with facts. Whether it's a call center or translation or driving a car, even flying an airplane, machines will be able to do anything that's total routine. And of course, many jobs aren't total routine, but we'll talk about that again later. But it's really quite clear when artificial intelligence, AI, meets HI, human intelligence, I think business as usual is over. Well, we got to think about what that means. That we have to focus on what makes us human, what machines can't do. And if machines do the routine, the driving, the shopping, the ordering, the organizing, the filing, the financial advice, maybe we should just do the non-routine. Maybe we should focus on what makes us human. Maybe we should teach our kids not to be robots or download information. I think this is crucial for our future. We must focus on being more human, not less, as artificial intelligence becomes the new normal. The other thing is I talk about a lot when I talk about technology and humanity is chapter 3 in my book, by the way, techversushuman.com. If you still haven't got it, it's available in 12 languages. But chapter number 3 in my book talks about this. It's very important that we don't think that we have to transcend humanity, as many transhumanists or singularity fans would say. We have to transcend human limitations. Well, I'm fine with transcending limitations by taking a cholesterol pill or something, but gearing myself up to become superhuman, connecting my brain to the internet, I think that's extremely dangerous and also probably wouldn't yield much benefit. I think a lot of these so-called upgrades would be a downgrade. I think we need to transcend technology, not humanity. We need to transcend the idea that technology is the answer to everything. It's a tool, right? I mean, a carpenter doesn't believe in the hammer. A carpenter believes in the house, in what he's building, right? It has a purpose. It's not the same than using a tool, it have a purpose. So when we go to this future, right, a future which we're definitely going to go to, we'll talk about that later on the panel, the cloud is going to be everything. Our healthcare data is going to be in the cloud, education will be in the cloud, music is already in the cloud, films and television are already in the cloud, everything is moving to the cloud. And when we have this cloud, who has authority over this cloud? Do we need data sovereignty? I think absolutely yes, on a European level. Does it mean we should be separate and separate internet? No, but we have to have some authority about where the data is going. Yeah, we need to have some sort of way of credibility also, right? Of being able to say, well, that we are in charge of making our own decision. And I think when we talk about the cloud, and clearly that's a huge business, the cloud is the biggest business ever. Right? Data, the new oil, right? I always say that everything should be as smart and as connected and as secure as possible, as necessary, but not more. Riffing off Einstein, of course, right? Who said that everything should be as simple as possible, but not more. Well, that was easy for Einstein to say, but I think we should be as connected as possible, as smart smart city, but not more. Right? We should not become just smart and connected just because it's a great goal to have and it makes money. And now we're literally living in this world, right? Where technology has become a religion. And I'm a great admirer of that myself. I love my mobile phones and my computers, but let's think about this for a second, right? When we think about the world like this or like this, it's all about data. It's called dataism. Right? You may have heard about this from Yuval Harari in different contexts, right? I don't think we'll find happiness here. We won't find happiness, human happiness, real happiness, not hedonism, not a quick fix. Right? We will not find happiness on the screen. We'll not find it in an app. We won't find it in the cloud. These are tools. If we don't find happiness with the tools, then where do we find happiness? Well, that's a big question, right? But it certainly isn't out here in the cloud. It's in here, there somewhere, right? Not here, but somewhere, right? As I think Daniel Kahneman said, we think with the body, not with the brain. So this is really important, I think, when we think about our future and where we're going with this. Technology isn't what we seek, right? It's how we seek. We seek to make connections to others. When you think about what is most important to humans, right? Engagement with other humans, experiences, real, full embodied experiences, right? And of course, relationships. I mean, this is really what makes us work. It's not a flow of data or the clean organization of data. And then, we're going into a future like this, clearly, where everything will have a digital window. We're going to vote online, especially now. We're going to work from home, especially now. We're going to virtually travel with holograms, right? But we have to remember something. When we do this kind of digital event and when we connect digitally, this is a good prep for what we really are looking for, which is trust and relationships. And trust isn't digital. Trust is not something I can find in here, or I can just add a button to the website, buy some trust at Amazon, or I don't know. We can't download relationships and we can't encode the relationships. They're much more complex than that. We should resist this sort of reductionism of saying that, everything has to be digitized and everything has to be code and everything has to be made sense in this regard. Right? So I think really what we're talking about in my book, I talk about this, I call this the androrhythms, the human things. Whoop, other side, right? So these are the things that make us human: emotions, intuition, creativity, imagination. I have to turn the right direction here. Different exercise with different backgrounds. Mystery. Right? I think somebody once said, and I forgot where I found this, but kudos. Right? Algorithms know the logic of everything, but the feeling of nothing. And it's funny now when two computers talk, if you can imagine two computers talking, they're exchanging data saying, okay, it's like this, it's like this, it's basically if this then that, right? The logic of everything. but do they know what it feels like? I mean, when people talk, what's the first question? You know, how do you feel like? How does it make you feel? How do you feel about that? You know, and are we going to talk like that to a machine? Are machines capable of doing that? Well, they're capable of simulating it. If you've seen the movie Her, great movie about this. But in the end, remember, the computer had 3,650 other relationships at the same time because it didn't have the algorithms. You want to know more about the algorithms, you can go to algorithms.com. That's where I pontificate a little bit more on this. So let me move on to the next topic here, okay? It's really quite clear when we talk about the future. Climate change is the next big thing. Well, it's big now, and climate change discussion and global warming is 1,000x of the current COVID-19 crisis. That's why we call the climate emergency. The only thing about it is we don't see a sick person, you know, next to us or on television today. Well, we see some of them, of course, dying of pollution, but we don't see 300 million climate refugees now. You know, people are saying we're going to see that maybe in 40 years. Right? So this climate emergency is actually very much related to technology and humanity, because clearly technology is the key to solving a lot of these problems. Hunger, water, food, disease, transportation, and all of those things can be solved with technology. But let's not make the mistake of saying, well, technology is that great solving tool, it's a panacea. It will not solve political, social, or cultural issues. And to solve climate change, we're going to face a lot of political issues. My hope is that because of COVID-19 and the current crisis, we can find a way to use this example of having to deal with emergency situations and roll that over into climate change and discuss what we really need to address it. I mean, clearly, this is going to be a major challenge for all of us, and we have to tackle it now. And this is why I believe, for example, that we should put carbon tax ideas into bailout scenarios for airlines and cruise ships and so on, right? Because the next thing that we're facing after climate emergency, and it sounds kind of like a dreary outlook, but it's not, I'll explain shortly, is the human emergency. Everything is being watched, everything is being monitored. You know, we overdo technology, and we use technology like a drug or like a religion or both, even worse. And you know, I call this too much of a good thing. Just like, you know, we've used fossil fuel to pump our entire economy in the last 50 years. So the second thing we're facing is the human emergency. I think it's very important to us if we think about this idea of how we can put the human back in the center of technology, rather than us being the object of technology. For example, social media is one of those things. Social media is clearly a human emergency. We have replaced real media with real people, with an algorithm, with unreal people, to create a fake reality. This is why I left Facebook 2 years ago, pretty much 2 years ago now, because I just couldn't see being part of that anymore. Right? That creates a human emergency. Right? And so I think if we look in this direction, let me advance to the important topic of the day here, security and safety. We have countries like Israel and Singapore and others who are in some ways using the COVID-19 opportunity to create a complete surveillance state. And of course, that's happened by default in other countries, but we have to be very careful about this. Right? I call this corona washing, and it's been used many times in the media now. It's by saying, well, we're doing this because of corona. We have to be able to track people. We have to be able to look at people. We have to be able to trace people. We have to, yeah, okay, emergency, yes. But you know what happens with emergency regulation? Look at America, the US, after September 11th. The FISA courts, the Patriot Act, that became the new normal and still is normal. And it is entirely normal to be in an emergency situation. That's not good. Right? I think this is something we have to really keep a very good eye on in Europe, is going back to saying, well, you know, we use technology for emergency situations, maybe a little bit too much, but then we have to go back, right? Because I really feel if you have nothing to hide, you're probably not human. I think hiding information is not something that is a default good setting, clearly, but having mystery, staying human. I also think we should not trade sort of a fake security idea for the complete lack of freedom and liberties. There has to be a balance. There is no such thing as 100% liberty or freedom in our society, but the reverse also shouldn't be true in my view. We shouldn't pretend that we get 100% security by essentially building a digital cage for us. And so I think emergency measures should not become the new normal. We should think about accountability and responsibility, and that's why I look forward to our discussion later with Mrs. Vestager from the European Commission about how we can go about this to create ethics in technology, what are called digital ethics, to have a supervision process in place that goes beyond this, because I really think we're moving into this world, right? I call this the new Renaissance. We move out of the picture a little bit. And here's I call this the Neo-Luvian man. It's like the Vitruvian man, but it's basically saying, well, in the 1500s, Leonardo da Vinci, right? Now we have all this technology around us, and we're going to need to find out what is our spot. You know, what is our existence when we're surrounded by AI and the Internet of Things and 3D printing and the blockchain and CRISPR-Cas9? I mean, it's mind-boggling, the possibilities. I say that we should invest as much in humanity as we do in technology. I think we need to also train our kids to understand technology clearly, but everybody's going to be a programmer. Is that going to save us? Machines can program themselves. The key question really is, in this new Renaissance, just like in the 15th century, when we went away from dogmas towards the human understanding, what do we want to be? And the second question is, what do we want our home to be, right? The earth. What kind of world do we want to have? I mean, I have 2 kids, I don't know about you, but this is a key question. What kind of world do I want my kids to have? And what kind of action do I take? And God knows we've been falling short on that discussion, on this whole debate about new Renaissance. For example, when we use data. It has been said many times, data is the new oil. That's a very old saying now. A lot of people disagree. I think it's actually the new plutonium. It's a new weapon. The weapon used by big technology companies, many of which are my clients, to turn us into data, turn the world into data. That's a good thing to have lots of data, because we can get smart, we can have smart cities, we can move faster. That's pretty amazing stuff, right? But we can also use it as a weapon. We can use artificial intelligence as a weapon, of course, and soldiers and so on. We can use genetic engineering as a weapon. So what does it take? It takes for us not to say no to the use of data, like healthcare data, but not to always just say yes, and to find a balance, and to find social contracts, regulations, agreements. Right? If we are going to use data like this, who's in charge? Who owns it? Right? Who guarantees things? Would you trust your healthcare data, your DNA, to a tech company or a social media company, or 23andMe for that matter? This is a very crucial question for our future that we have to answer, because this is our default world, right? Right here, the ultra-connected world. I mean, we're hyper-connected. We're globalized in many ways now. Globalization is sort of on the list of to be abolished, right? But it's really quite clear. Technology drives our future, and we're not going to go back to not using technology. But the question is, who defines it? And I think the answer is ethics. Is what do we feel about each other? How do we feel about each other? What do we want to achieve? And ethics, you'd be surprised, is not as lofty as it sounds. I think a lot of us could agree in a lot of ethics. For example, most people, 99.9%, would agree that having autonomous weapons that can kill people on their own without human supervision are definitely going too far. So digital ethics and the whole discussion, the weaponization, I think this is a strong agenda for Europe. We use technology, it drives our future, but then we have to define what we want, because clearly in this world, right, the totally connected world, whether you think about self-sufficiency or deglobalization, or what I think the economist has called snowballization, right? Slowballization, right, to make it slower, right? Okay, that's going to happen, but now we have a different paradigm. And this is really becoming clear, I think, in our time here of COVID-19. We have to have a different purpose. Not just profit, growth, jobs, GDP, but what I call people, planet, purpose, and prosperity. The possibility of reaching all 4 of those. That's the new society we need. And technology is the key for this. And the other key is ethics. People, planet, purpose, prosperity. Al Gore called this sustainable capitalism. Quite some time ago, I think that must have been around 10 years ago or so. Now we're discussion on as to how we can actually reach this. Here is the Neuralace from Elon Musk. You may have seen this already on the internet before, where he's actually proposing to drill tiny holes into your head. Good luck with that. And then connect to the internet so we can upload our brain and become superhuman. And now he's basically suggesting this as a way of gearing up. Right? And as much as I like Elon's other things and his brightness, I think this has taken it a step too far. We don't have to compete with technology in becoming technology. We have to keep our players by becoming more human, right? As I said before, technology is not what we seek. We don't seek to become technology. At least I don't. And of course, if you do, that's a different discussion. And how can we get those two things across at the same time? So let me move towards a close on this, and very soon we're going to have some questions and debates. Right? This world is hyper-connected. Euro is hyper-connected. That is the key for us. I mean, I think the challenge is that the more we connect, we also must protect. We connect with each other, we connect with data, but we must protect what makes us human. And what makes us human? The algorithms, right? So emotions, mysteries, mistakes, serendipity, discovery, the things that machines can't do. And I think this is really also the important point about what we need to do in Europe here. We need to collaborate and we need to have solidarity with each other so that we can protect our idea of how we want to live in the future. And this brings me to my final point about Europe. A lot of people have talked about this. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the debate. Are we going to end up with the United States of Europe after or during the crisis, or will it be the opposite, right? A disintegration of Europe? This is a very important discussion, also because of technology and humanity, because we need to make sure that Europe has a power position in the world that rivals the US and China, and not be disintegrated all over the place, right? I think the idea of United States of Europe is being put through a great test right now, primarily because of the solidarity between the North and the South and the East and the West. I think we need to do whatever it takes to build solidarity and to maintain a strong united Europe in every possible financial and practical way. I think this is the only way that we can go to a future and say, this is what we want from technology. This is how we want to regulate AI or AGI, artificial general intelligence. And this is how we want to proceed into a future that we want. And this, of course, is a very, very big task for the European Commission, but also for local governments, for national governments, for every mayor. And this is why I have suggested in the past that every politician, every public official should have a driver's license for the future, should understand what's coming, because we're going to get.
So, we seemingly just lost Gerd for a quick second. That sometimes happens with technology and remote things, but I know we're just fixing on solving the imminent future. And while that's happening, first of all, thank you very much for adding your questions. I can see Gerd is just getting back up. Gerd, if you can hear me, you can jump in anytime. Nope, we can't hear you at this point. You still seem to be muted. So we're still having sound issues, Gerd. No, I'm afraid we still can't hear you. So that's a bit unfortunate. You continue on speaking, Gerd, until we hear you. I'll take over the stage. I know someone in the background will be helping you on fixing this as of right now. And I'd just like to say to the audience how great Gerd's outlook was. I can see Lisa is already up next. Gerd, you ready? Now we're still having sound interference. Let's give it another good shot because I'd love to do the Q&A with you, Gerd. No, we're still just getting a loud buzzing sound as of now. Maybe there's a chance to test a different signal or different channel. So Gerd is going to continue on fixing it. I liked very much the way he ended very strongly, saying, we need to have a United States of Europe, whatever it takes. I love that passionate appeal. Gerd, let's give it one more shot. and see. No, we're still not getting a sound on this, which is very, very unfortunate, I guess. So it's probably best if at this point in time we move on. Get one last shot. No, I'm afraid it's not working. That's a real unfortunate thing. Anyway, Gerd, it's been a pleasure listening to you. There's so many inspiring words, and I hope at some later point in time we can follow up on the Q&A. But that's the way it sometimes goes. Those are the challenges. If we have 140 global studios we need to connect, that was number 140. Now we're moving on to studio 139. I can see in the future because I see a huge smile coming up already. The next talk is called Gen Z, Unbroken Diamonds in Our Hands. Now that sounds really good. That's a very promising title. Our next speaker is called Lisa Gray, and she's the CEO of Black Meteor, and she is an executive producer, a content creator. And what I really like, I'm really very curious about this, she believes in the convergence of media and tech. I'm very excited, but first off, let's roll the intro for Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hello, Lisa. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you very much for joining us. And
it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me today to talk at Podim. It's an honor to be on this virtual stage to share with you one of my favorite topics, Generation Z. Before I launch into my talk, I wanted to give you a bit of background on who I am. I'm a New Frontiers consultant. I moved to the UK 5 years ago, invited on an exceptional talent visa, which they only give out 200 a year globally for my contribution to music and interactive entertainment. I guess it's due to the types of clients I've had, my work in this space has made me become an accidental expert in Generation Z. I run a company called Black Meteor, which specialises in media brands, studios and tech platforms who engage with Generation Z on a daily basis. Because of my expertise, my scope has grown to consulting education institutions, brands and government organisations on how to inspire and engage Generation Z. I've been working with and working for Generation Z for the last couple of years. I've been working in media for about 20 plus years, and specifically in the UK and the US markets for the last 10. So let's go through what I personally learned as vital defining features of who this generation is. Generation Z is widely considered as the people born between 1996 and 2012, a generation that has had the internet around for their whole life. Growing up in a time of the internet has made them by nature truly globally minded and aware. They live in a world where friendships are not only from their school or local sports teams, they are friends without borders. To these young people, it's normal to contact other people from other generations, from different countries, and easily travel to go and meet each other. They are also a generation of entrepreneurs. In a recent Forbes study, about 73% of Generation Z teens dreamed about having their own business or implementing a business idea. They love science, scientists, and scientific facts. Many academics believe that this trend has come around because currently we live in a polarized world, which more on this later. They are conscious of their power and what role they have to play within their community. 48% of Gen Zs identify themselves as racially or ethnically diverse. I heard one Gen Z tell me that their generation is so diverse that it doesn't even recognize diversity. Also, this generation doesn't just have a short attention span, but they're extremely short on time. They hate time wasters. On average, they have a higher IQ than previous generations. A Stanford University study said that this is due to cultural and generational transference. As a consequence, they are by nature less risk averse. Having grown up in more uncertain times, this makes them even more anxious about the future. In 2019, Generation Z outnumbered millennials, making up 32% of the world's 7.7 billion person population. It's a common thing to group all young people in the same box, and I've made that mistake. So I wanted to take the time to point out through my personal experience the main differences between Generation Y and Generation Z. I also want to note here, I'm very self-conscious about massive generalizations, especially when it comes to generational ones across cultures. So at the same time, they are helpful as guardrails when trying to understand a target group. So I put a big, they generally tend to be, instead of they are exactly like this in front of what I'm stating. Sure, these demographics are mostly online, communicating virtually mostly with their peers and making their own content. But the nuances on how they engage with their content are very different and vital to note. Over the years, for me, the most interesting differences I've found between these two generations are there is a sense of freedom and opportunity when you see Generation Y. But in contrast, Gen Zs by nature seem to be more motivated towards security and stability values. Millennials tend to be more focused on the now, whereas Gen Zs tend to be more focused on the future. Another key difference between these two generations for me is that millennials tend to be more curators and sharers, whereas in contrast, Generation Zs tend to be more creators and collaborators. Where do you find your customer audience or community? With the multitude of options available for consumers these days, finding where any target demographic prefers to spend their time and be entertaining is becoming more and more difficult. The fact is, especially true when trying to connect with Generation Z. I remember when I was working with the Johnny Carson Center for Emerging Media Arts in the United States. During that time, we were crafting, what does a media degree look like in 2020? I spoke to hundreds of Gen Zs that year, and I was often told, everything I do, I watch, I read is on my mobile. I watch Netflix on my phone, YouTube on my phone, laptops are only for writing essays. What we see in this market, and I've seen firsthand, is that bottom line, it's the mobile first generation. According to the Institute of Business Management, roughly 78% of Gen Zers will use their smartphone over computers and other devices. Thanks to the multitude of apps available, consumers in this generation depend on their cell phones for a large number of tasks, including paying the bills, banking, to window shopping, communicating with their friends, their family, consuming news and entertainment. Apps such as Instagram and Snapchat still very much dominate a young person's attention, especially in this generation. According to Smart Insights, Snapchat's key demographic are 13 to 17-year-olds and take up 70% of their 229 million daily active users. I believe it's these apps' content making tools that keep this age engaged compared to Facebook. On April 21st this year, at Snapchat's quarterly earnings report, CEO Evan Spiegel remarked that augmented reality is continuing to play an essential part in their growth. With people now playing with filters and lenses 85% more each day than they were last year. Along with WhatsApp, Snapchat, and Instagram, they all provide the key destinations for communication for this generation across the world. You'll see on my second line that video still plays a huge role in connecting with this demographic. According to the internet advertising company Criteo, Gen Zs in key Western markets stream videos for roughly 23 hours each week. At the end of April, TikTok surpassed 2 billion downloads globally, just 5 months after hitting 1.5 billion downloads, according to the mobile app measurement firm Sensor Tower. TikTok's first quarter in 2020 saw the most downloads for any app ever in a quarter, garnering more than 315 million across Apple's apps and Android Google Play. 41% of the 800 million subscribers on viral video platform TikTok are 16 to 24. That's extraordinary. Quibi, only launched a few weeks ago, had a rocky start, but I'm confident it will find its legs. It's just working out how to realize what a mobile-first content offering looks like. And to be honest, its price point may attract an audience more of Gen Ys rather than Gen Zs first. However, the more Quibi engages with mobile-first creators and partners them with fluid Hollywood producers, we will see some exciting content and new experiences coming out of Quibi. I do really like the turnstile feature. IGTV on Instagram is developing in exciting ways. and the growth in popularity for influencers that can create content beyond selfies and one-dimensional Instagram posts is promising. I also see YouTube to continue to be popular, as this generation learned a lot from how-to videos featured on this platform. According to Adweek, when it comes to shopping recommendations, YouTube's Generation Z's platform, YouTube's Generation Z is the platform of choice, followed by Instagram and Facebook. This age group is gaining interest in interactive and choose-your-own-adventure content. According to research firm Cognient, in recent study they conducted with this age group, 55% said that they prefer to choose their plot line or line from a movie of the show they're streaming. It's because of this, the corner of the entertainment industry market you can find Generation Z is games. According to the Internet Advertising Bureau, technological advancements have finally made it possible for gaming to go big. Today, devices come with high connectivity standards and games that can be played anywhere, anytime. We have already seen how the gaming industry has become 10 times bigger than before. Gaming and gamers have evolved over the years, with esports and streaming now experiencing unprecedented popularity. According to the World Economic Forum, the global video game market is forecast to be worth $159 billion by the end of 2020, around 4 times on box office revenues, which will come in about $43 billion, and almost 3 times the amount of the music industry revenues, which comes in at about $57 billion. The biggest market by revenue is Asia Pacific, with 50% of the games market by value. North America accounts for a quarter of that revenue. Generation Z owns more consoles than millennials. For them, gaming is much more than just an escape of entertainment. It's intrinsic to how they connect with their friends. Take the success of Fortnite, for example. The game owes its huge popularity to the perception among Gen Zers as a connector between real-life friends. Many players took up the game because their friends were hooked to it too. It's also important to note commercial moves like Epic Games, creators of Fortnite, buying House Party, an app that has come into its own during this current lockdown period, has 60% of its demographic under 24. I'm very excited to watch these companies dominate and create in the mainstream entertainment space. In the past 6 weeks, we have seen announcements of artists performing in these virtual worlds, including the epic 3-day concert of Travis Scott in Fortnite. And over a few days ago, House Party announcing an event where A-lists will perform on their interactive platform. So yes, please watch this space. And maybe with this generation, VR may finally have its day. Oculus took a big step towards catching up with Sony in 2019 with the launch of the Quest headset that untethers the headset from a computer. Really simple, but super effective. According to Superdata, 400,000 Oculus Quests were sold in the third quarter of 2019, and the device, up until like 2 weeks ago, was sold out for months. Over the last few months, Facebook has struggled to keep any sort of stock levels up for Oculus Quest. According to VR Focus, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg said that Quest had surpassed our expectations. I wish we could make more faster during this period. Bloomberg sources also noted that Facebook is working on an augmented reality version of the Oculus headset. Stay tuned. Even though we briefly touched on what Generation Z cares about, I think it's essential to go a little deeper to understand how you can speak to and engage them into your idea or product. With the highest IQ of generations to date, they don't suffer fools. So it's worth getting to know them. If you aren't authentic, Generation Z will be the first to raise the red flag. If you are trying to take advantage of a moment, you'll lose them fast. Generation Z cares about the collective good and well-being. They also care about everyone having the chance to be who they are in their lives. In other words, freedom of expression is vital to Gen Zs, but only for the people and groups that they regard as real. Growing up with the internet, they know all your tricks, so don't try to trick them. They'll see absolutely right through it. Also, because they've grown up with access to more information than any other generation before, they tend to be more cynical, with the cynicism coming from a deep connection to community values such as the environment, politics, diversity, and inclusion. Your business will need a purpose, otherwise you won't get their attention. Independence is essential to them. While we saw a trend with millennials that they were comfortable living with their parents at their parents' houses as young adults, Generation Z values financial autonomy and wanting to find their own place sooner rather than later. Generation Z consumers expect brands to contribute to society. According to Business Insider, 61% are willing to pay more for products that are ethically produced. I mentioned earlier that privacy matters to this generation, even though this generation is online more than any other age. According to IBM's survey, Uniquely Gen Z, less than 1/3 of teens say they are comfortable about sharing their personal details than any other contact information and purchase history. However, the same study revealed that 61% would feel better sharing personal information with brands if they could trust that it was securely stored and protected. We have all been significantly impacted by COVID-19. What I was presenting now about Generation Z was very different to what I thought I was going to present when Podim first approached me. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been keenly keeping an eye on how this generation, who is currently going through COVID, is also going through their coming of age. US research firm The Morning Consult reports that members of Gen Z already see the outbreak as the most impactful event of their lifetimes. I read an incredibly insightful article on natgeo.com that painted an explicit picture on what life was like for Gen Zs during COVID-19 that I want to share with you now. Amy Magdalene expected to speak at this year's Earth Day rally on National Mall in Washington, DC. Instead, with the April 22 gathering cancelled, she watched a digital celebration on her laptop in Seattle, where she'd been sheltering at home since mid-March with her family. Her high school classes have moved online. She graduates in the class of 2020, but the usual rites of passage, the prom, the graduation ceremony, have been cancelled. Her 96-year-old grandfather had been hospitalised with COVID-19. A week later, he died. At his hug-free funeral, Magdalene, her parents and her uncle stood 6 feet apart in face masks and gloves. I spoke to clients at Reading and Bristol University in the UK and universities across the US about how their students are coping during COVID-19. When I talked to the founding director of the Johnny Carson Centre for Emerging Media Arts, she said it had been a massive shock for them and for the teachers. They had gone from preparing them for the generation who were about to graduate into one of the most blossoming economies the US had seen in a long time, to preparing them to graduate into an economic depression far worse than 2008, and possibly even worse than the 1930s. It's still too early to tell, but she said that they're holding the latter scenario as a likely possibility. Globally, UNESCO recently reported that schools have closed for 1.5 billion children, more than 90% of the world's student population. We don't see too many moments in history like this, says Alexander White, who teaches at the epidemics at the Johns Hopkins University. Generation Z is going to have to find and build communities in a different ways than any other generation has before. During the pandemic, Gen Z is seeking more connection than ever. 60% of Gen Zers across 17 markets are spending longer on social media during the lockdown. Snap Inc. at the Q1 report on April 21st said that their community grew by 11 million daily active users to the average of 220 million daily active users using the app in Q1, up 5% quarter on quarter and 20% year on year. Engaging Gen Zs in online communities and giving them a way to play a part in COVID-19 relief efforts can create positive brand association. The CEO, Evan Spiegel, further reported that more than half of their Gen Z population on the app is watching their news content on Snapchat Discover. He felt it was particularly important for us to educate their audience who curated trustworthy information during these critical times. Fridays for the Future, which helped organise the weekly student climate strikes pioneered by Swedish teen activist Greta Thunberg, is urging activists to email politicians instead and striking on social media. Thunberg herself has been reported with coronavirus-like symptoms and is urging followers to post pictures of themselves with placards at home. Earth Day this year saw a 72-hour live-streamed digital march of speeches and music. Generation Z is a generation most likely to delay purchases during COVID-19, according to Global Web Index. So now is not the time to push any sales, but to nurture your community and build brand fidelity. So why is Generation Z a rough diamond in our hands? Well, it is estimated that this demographic will account for 40% of luxury purchases by 2035. And while the pandemic is throwing their future into question, it's also spurring a wave of online camaraderie and creativity. This generation also knows and understands what to expect from brands and are quick to disregard them if they don't resonate with their lifestyle. Values of openness, transparency, and relatability are more critical to Gen Zers, and they expect the same from their brands. This also relates to their experience of how they connect mostly in a virtual space where their real life friends and are present side by side with online influencers who align with their values. They prefer images to words and emojis. That's why Instagram is one of the favourite communication apps. It's fast, based on a photo or two on brief text. If a platform provides these maker tools to encourage these highly creative forms of communication, it will do so well. To refer to Snapchat again, they grew by 30% in the last week of March compared to the previous weeks in January, with more up than 50% in new markets. During Q1, over 4 billion snaps with their in-app camera have been made every day on average. And with more and more celebrity engagement going on TikTok, with one of my favourites pictured, Judi Dench and her grandson, who perform regularly. So if you haven't seen it, go onto the platform and have a look. There is an opportune time to engage on this platform. For brands, the benefit of TikTok is twofold. First, the process of generating awareness on TikTok is not dependent on building an audience on the platform. The second benefit is that once you've started to establish your audience, as long as you're creating content consistently, we recommend 3 times a week, you continue to expose your brand to audiences regularly. Pay attention to IGTV and Snapchat Discover. Video wins across all algorithms, as everyone here knows. Marketeers who use videos on average grow revenue 49% faster than non-video. Meaningful connections matter. Watch the rise of nano influencers and pick them over your macro influencers. I spoke to Naomi Sage, who's Director of Marketing at Plarium, and she mentioned that they absolutely now go towards nano influencers compared to macro influencers because Gen Zs look for more meaningful engagement with them. As their truth hunters, don't underestimate the power of putting your advertising dollars behind search. Gen Z seem to be more positive about online search rather than blatant advertising on their feed, so get your SEOs right. Remember, when trying to connect with this age group, they seem to be more demanding than any other consumer before. They want transparency in the market, and they want brands to tell them about how they manufacture their product. As I mentioned earlier, they look for corporate social responsibility, respect for the environment. They read labels and they leave favourable or critical opinions about products and services online. But what a way to keep true to your brand offering, right? One of the most exciting examples of brand engagement with Gen Z I've seen over the last couple of weeks has been the way Nike has responded to COVID. In March, Nike pledged to repurpose footwear to create face shields for frontline healthcare workers. It was recently reported that the NHS staff were forced to share masks due to shortages. And at the same time, Italian doctors warned that the protective equipment is vital to prevent the collapse of the country's healthcare system. Nike's genuine and generous response to COVID crisis helps to instill an added layer of confidence and support for healthcare workers. And along with this, they donated 140,000 pieces of sports equipment to the healthcare workers in the UK. The second and exciting activation was Nike had realised during this period was to make their premium subscription-based Nike Training Club workouts free for all users. And they've had a popular take-up not only on their platform, but also inspired by on their YouTube. I have some great best practice video case studies on how to make effective Generation Z content and campaigns. So please get in touch and I will happily share. I personally love working with this generation so far. They are challenging, cynical, highly creative and exciting. I also think they have the potential to save us from some of the biggest challenges the world has seen. The best we can do is listen, get out of the way and build for them what enables their dreams, intrinsic values and traits. We also should understand the perspective baby boomers, Generation X and Generation Y bring to our world to help this purely online generation value in-person connection and communication. Don't underestimate the experience a lot of us have had in a world without the internet. And we should really work hard to make sure that Generation Z, especially post-COVID time, learns further the value of in-person communication. Thank you so much for sticking with me and allowing me to talk about one of my favourite topics. If you have any questions or want to get in touch, here are my details. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was really, really cool listening in. There's a couple of questions I would like to share. Some are coming in and some are personal. Now, I'd like to go to the front. At some point in time, you said you believe that VR is coming. Now, we've heard that quite a few times in the last 5 years or 6 or 7 years. Why is it actually coming now?
Well, yeah, I've been waiting for it to be at the level that my imagination can deal with the ideas for it. But I think the key difference has been in the fact that this Oculus headset is untethered. And I think the fact that it's quite, it's just easy to operate has made a huge difference in people engaging with it. I also think the price point has really, really helped for people to purchase this. And, you know, with 5G rolling out across the world, I think there's opportunities for creators to realize these immersive worlds. I definitely was one of those kids that, you know, in the 80s watched these films with VR going, I can't wait to be a part of making that stuff, and have often been disappointed that it doesn't have the platform and the technology to back up where I think it can take it. But I think we're getting closer, and there's nothing like being in a lock-in to try things virtually, is there? So I think that's as a consequence of the period we're all living in, has also encouraged people to try it out.
Very much looking forward to having one in my hands as well. I'm very much looking forward to having a convenient product, and that's something I'm kind of also hoping for mass adoption. I liked also the way you kind of highlighted the special approach Gen Z has. And now you also said they really want authentic people, authentic brands. Now, I'm quite curious, what's your take on this, that a lot of companies still, for whatever reason, seem to not be willing to take them into some sort of decision and or product or brand building processes? Should they do that or shouldn't they do that?
In my experience, I think they definitely should, because I think this generation, we've seen with some of the leaders that have come from this generation already, that they want to be part of the conversation. I know with some of the universities I've worked with, and also some of the collaborative projects, that you just get a better engagement. They absolutely respect what they're bringing to the table, and they're not coming in being precocious, but I think they give you an insight on how to create for a demographic that's very different to all of us.
Now, there's a question coming in where someone wants to know, why was 1996 a dividing point for the generation? Was there any specific event?
It's funny because in the lead up to preparing, I was looking at where we talk about the generations, and they were quite adamant about 1996. I'm not sure. That's a really interesting question. Was it when Gen Xers started to have babies? I don't know.
But something we'll have to look into.
Absolutely. No, definitely. If that person wants to send me a note, I'm the kind of nerd that will research that now. So absolutely.
Actually, I'm going to do the same once we're done. I'm super curious myself. Now, I have two more questions I'd like to know. I quite like the way you said, okay, that they also, Gen Z is very specific about building communities. And yesterday, one of our speakers said, the interesting thing is there's investors in the US willing to invest in communities, but hardly any European investors investing in communities. What's your take on that? It seems like a huge weakness that Europeans have in building digital communities.
I think that's really interesting, because a lot of the trends, when I do work in the US, they look to the Europe for their concepts and their more risky ideas. So I feel like it's a real shame that they're not investing in communities, because quite often, to work out what their community looks like, they look towards this side of the world. And that's why I'm here rather than over there. So I think that's quite a curious thing to point out. I also think there's bigger money, especially in the field I work with, in media and entertainment in the US, and that probably plays a part in it. I also think the investment in communities it's not a quick fix. It takes time. And I know when I onboard new clients, they're like, why haven't I grown to this amount? And why haven't I got that engagement? Because they take time, because of the genuine engagement that needs to be at the key of it, especially for this age group. I think they've watched Gen Ys and the excitement they had with the internet and being connected for the first time, and like, I want something real and I want something more. And it's authentic is a very interesting word to use commercially, because I think it's been bandied around, and you can only use it now if you actually can back it up. So
I'm liking that. Now, just out of curiosity, have you had a chance to see what Clubhouse is yet? Andreessen Horowitz just invested into them. Does that ring a bell yet?
Yeah, I've looked in. I've read about it. I haven't looked into it enough to make a comment, but it's really interesting, isn't it?
It is, because it kind of seems like the things you were saying, that the kind of people are looking for influencers who are not the big influencers, but the smaller influencers, smaller communities, authentic communities. It seems to be condensing some of your theses right down.
Yeah, I think it's I think that comes from a place of you know, everyone, you know, you can buy followers and you can show that you've got big numbers, but really, are they getting an idea across the line? So this generation has tried, has things have been pitched to them, but I think they just want genuine connection. And so that's where I think and you know, I've worked in film and television for 20 years, and sometimes have been put with a talent that doesn't know about engineering. It's an engineering show, and or fashion, you know, but because they've got quite a big following, they're the ones that are hosting the show. So I like this fact that you can't fool anyone, and you need people who can authentically talk about an area of expertise to be able to be the influencer in this situation. I think it's cutting out a lot of fat, which is great.
It seems to. Here's the last audience question that just came in. So Lisa Gray, thanks for the great talk. Question for you. You said transparency is crucial to Gen Z. What is the main metric by which Gen Z measures the transparency of the products and services? Someone wants to know metrics.
Well, I think in my experience, it's been the actual community talking to each other, and don't underestimate the power of all of them sharing their thoughts and their ideas, and going back to basic pack mentality when it comes, you know, psychology pack mentality. I also think just knowing that you have to always have an honest practice when you're communicating with your community. That's so it's I think it just comes down to human communication and knowing that you can't lie and you can't fib anymore. And so it's just making sure, and the best way you can keep control over that is making sure that you're, you know, as I said in my talk, that, you know, yes, this is a very cynical and very opinionated generation, but what a way to keep your brand guidelines in check.
Last question for me. What's the one thing all the other generations don't get about Gen Z?
Their confidence for their age. I mean, we've seen, you know, I know, especially with my work in the US, and that's where a lot of my references came from because of my experience. There are things going on with that age group where they're just challenging values and challenging structures that generations before just didn't have the confidence to do it, and they've just had enough. And so I think people find that quite baffling, but also exciting. And you've got to either choose to be scared or fearful of it, or get excited and see where it can take our world. And I have a lot of confidence that I think that they can really help us with some of the challenges that we've got ahead of us because of that confidence. But at the same time, it's really important to make sure that we bring our skill set to the table, which is interpersonal communication, because I think that's where they're going to be most challenged.
Lisa, it's been a pleasure listening to you. It's been a pleasure meeting you in this somewhat different setting. Stay safe. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to meet you in person sometime soon.
Yes,
thank you very
same.
much.
And thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thank you so much. Take care and goodbye. Now, we've talked technology, we've talked society, and now we'd like to get to the next part, and that's collaboration. The next talk is called New Reality and New Opportunity. And this gentleman, he says the world is not enough. He says the real interesting part actually starts in space. He's from the European Space Agency's Business Incubation Center and Science Park, Graz. His name is Martin, but before you get to meet him, let's roll the intro. And here he is, live and in color. Welcome to our stage, Martin Moessler. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Danielle. How are you?
I am great. And yourself?
Pretty well. Podim has always been on top of my event agenda. This year's it's on top because there's nothing else. So yeah, I'm very well.
Perfect. The stage is yours, my friend. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank all of you, especially the organizers of Podim, for the lovely invitation. You've really shown to be up to the game, and what you made possible here and what you realized is really impressive. So thanks to Maribor and into all lovely living rooms and home offices all over Europe and the Southeastern European region. Basically, during the last 2 months, we've been exposed to a situation where a very smart, tiny system, one could see it as a startup, but I don't want to, went viral, developed an incredibly disruptive character, and now here we are, with our economies on its knees, driven by a combination of fear and kind of a lack of knowledge how to react and how to proceed. And actually, while some might be considering to give up, this is the time of the disruptors. Whenever disruption is in the channel, it's the time of the disruptors. This is actually the situations where not only companies, but empires are formed. And the point I want to make is that there is no better time for our sector, for the startup sector, than the current one. This is not cynical. This is, I'm absolutely convinced, the pure truth. And if we now react quickly, like Podim did, for example, if we seize the opportunity, the challenges which we're currently facing are going to be drivers of future innovations. While it may be important to ask where we are, because we are in a pretty dire situation, it actually is more important to ask where we want to be. It's not important where your father, your mother, your teacher, or your girlfriend wants you to be. What is critical is where you want to go. What's your vision? What's your dreams? What's your ideas and realities? And allowing them to come to fruition and to make them come true is the key of my work, of my team's work, and basically of all startup support ecosystems all over the planet. So what brought us here is some kind of a combination of negligence, a bit of bad luck, and where we go if we don't change course is probably even a more dire one. Because if you look at the elements of climate change, they're actually much more disruptive than this virological situation. But we seem to ignore it on a permanent basis for decades. We need to change course here. So where we are is not as important as where we want to be. Why do I believe that the startup communities all over the world, especially within our region, will be doing well in the next years, has to do with the fact that, as I said at the entry, in times of disruption, it's the time of the disruptors. And the really, really innovative ideas are going to succeed quite considerably here. Now, referring to Sarah's talk, which I loved, was really, really incredibly well done. I'm not entirely sure whether the next photo filter app is gonna cut it. Whether the next photo filter app, which gives you a nice holiday tan, is going to make a serious difference to the planet and to its people. But we will have to kind of find a combination here of creating real change and looking good. Obviously, both is important, and we'll navigate ourselves through this challenge. Basically, startups have a serious advantage compared to corporate players, especially when it comes to their agility and their capability to adopt. This, in combination, creates quite quite a positive and resilient system which can drive global change and a generally optimistic dynamism as well. And part of this asset is, of course, part of the startup's asset is, of course, the clear envisioning of a different reality and the energy and capability to drive it. First, because there is very little to carry, which is different to corporate players. But second, because you have a set of qualities apart from the vision. You build a team around it. You see whether there is a market, whether you have a problem, a solution to a problem which really exists. This is always key. And then you step by step implement it. And there's a lot of talk at the moment, and it's basically the element of implementation, which is mostly providing and creating the biggest trouble and problems. And it's the teams as well as the implementation as such, where the biggest failures are being witnessed and created. And there's a lot of talk about capital, about liquidity. I see the point, but we need to be aware that liquidity and capital is always just a form of converted energy. So basically, the team and its drive, its passion, its energy is being converted into an investor's capital gains, and we need to be aware that there's nothing given to us, but we are giving energy, which is shown in figures, and that is key. So it's our money which is being invested because it's our energy. And what is beautiful about the picture which I'm showing here is that sometimes we need to kind of get back into the childhood thinking, where it may be sometimes enough to just paint something on the street and imagine the space shuttle to fly. Now we know that space shuttles are not flying anymore, but still the picture is critical. When we look at innovation cycles, and I will come back to that in a moment, innovation cycles tend to take about 50 years. They go from discovery of a validation to the development. Then you have imitators and followers, Me Too products. You commercialize stuff. And then you need to make new discoveries and go for future innovations. Otherwise, you'll be bad on the market. Sometimes you can go for protective measures, which don't always work. There's workarounds, especially in the horizontal field. We witness this all the time. So basically, within these cycles, you need to really provide critical value. And I'm not always sure whether photo filter apps and TikTok, etc., is this value, but there is something within them which we need to see and credit. Daniel mentioned that I believe in the critical element of collaboration, and what space teaches us is exactly that. The space station, which you can see here, would have never been built without the cooperation during the Cold War between the back then USSR and the US, as well as the European Space Agency. It's a symbol of peaceful interaction of powers and forces which were actually more or less at war with each other. And the global challenges which we face and the current situation which we're in is just one element of that, can only be solved by such a cooperative approach. And it's not by accident that today's astronauts are brought to space from a former Russian nuclear missile launch site. What a beautiful picture, where like intercontinental nuclear missiles were prepared to be launched during the Cold War. Today, American astronauts are brought to the ISS. When it comes to the dire and challenging situation which we're in, we clearly need to unite as a globe, and we need to address the serious and big problems. Because first of all, the big picture is key to solving the big problems. But on the other hand, the big picture allows you to go for the tough stuff. And I'm always a fan of difficult tasks, because in the difficult area, where the big problems are located, you have way less competition than in the easy areas. So as a consequence, always go for the tough stuff. I'm a big fan of that. And startups which think really big tend to be considerably more successful than others. So I've covered that. And of course, you need to keep on, as I mentioned in the innovation cycle, you need to keep on innovating, otherwise you'll be copied and moved out of the market. And the bigger the stuff, the bigger your approach, the better. Seizing opportunities on a daily basis and aiming high is part of our game. Don't ask me where this goldfish jumps. Let's consider it jumps somewhere into a bigger lake. If there is no lake, it's gonna be in trouble. But I like the picture a lot. So take a bit of a risk. Sometimes you land in the water, sometimes not. Basically, we are taking, as an incubator and as a network, we're taking quite a bit of risk too at the moment. We are moving beyond borders. We are part of the European Union's biggest startup support network with over 22 locations in 20 countries, developing over 250 space technology related startups. And Science Park Graz, the high-tech incubator located within Styria, is handling this program, this space-related program for the whole of Austria, and is also actively supporting the development of incubation structures within the Southeastern European realm. And this is a call to action. Whoever is interested to incubate, we are present in your regions, and whoever is interested to work with us as an incubator, for example, startups and incubators alike will be supported. Just contact us. Join this quite considerable and really uplifting network. Everybody is talking about digital transformation. We see an element of transformation here. Podim reflects the very latter in an impressive way. But what we basically have been unaware of is that about more than 50 years ago, a smart guy called Douglas Engelbart held the first online presentation, like us today, 50 years ago. He also invented the computer mouse. He also invented the hyperlink. And it shows you that we need to act now if we want to be ahead of the game, because given, for example, the critical situation relating to our environment and the slow responses, we really need to get active now. Douglas Engelbart, he was not really given credit during the time of his work, but he should be given credit today. I'm often asked what's going to be the next big thing, and I'm absolutely certain that the next big thing is already here. It's first of all, it's going to be in one of the following 5 sectors: agriculture, education, energy, environment, mobility, health. Why is there no ICT, no digitalization here? Because this is basically the means to work within these sectors, to change these sectors. But it's not the end game. It's a means to make a difference. So the next big thing, if you look at Engelbart, and if you look at us going for digitalization about 50 years later, step by step, the next big thing is most certainly already here. And it's going to be, as already mentioned, in agriculture. It will be low carbon farming. It will be food security. It will be precision farming. And it will be the smart distribution of our agricultural resources, because we need to soon feed 12 billion people, and we can. It's just very much a question of distribution. Education will be absolutely critical, and a critical element of a better and of a more equal future society. We need to move away from a situation and a system where the social background determines where we go as kids. It's your talents which need to determine where you go. Energy and environment is going to be absolutely crucial for all our future. And there will be smart energy will be the critical success principle. Health, especially when it comes to the kind of big data, AI-based aggregation of blood samples, etc., will make a huge difference. And something which is my personal love is the sector of mobility, because on one hand, it is incredibly destructive when it comes to emissions and other elements, but it is also a critical part of the future. We need to get faster again. We need to be able to travel faster, more sustainable, and we need to have a more personalized approach, especially to air travel. I'm absolutely convinced that this is part of our future. So all that needs to be wrapped into a system of sustainability and our clear responsibility to protect the environment for future generations. And I would like to close with 2 slides which kind of reflect the European Space Agency's approach to technology, which is technology is absolutely key. It brought us where we are, and it will get us where we need to be. And we need to think smarter. We need to use it in order to create a better, more equal, and more sustainable planet. And it always needs to serve for the better of humanity. And I want to close with the idea that what space sciences can teach us is that while our bodies are on a daily basis bound by gravity, our minds and our souls are not. So let's have great gravity-free ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I love the closing words. And if you as audience have questions, just pop them into the comments. Anytime, just go for it. Martin, you said quite a few things, and one of the many things you said was, number one, we have to feed 12 billion people, so no challenge, but I'm understanding if someone has technology or intelligence, how to solve that, this is going to be huge, right?
Well, it's pretty much a distribution issue, more than a technological one. That's why politics and technology needs to be kind of united in a smart manner. We can feed 12 billion people today already, but still every 5 seconds a child dies from hunger, which is pretty much of a distributional issue, less than a technological one.
Now, you also said something interesting as well, that you said, okay, you believe in a personal approach to air travel. Give us some insights what that could mean.
We've talked about it briefly yesterday, Daniel. I'm absolutely convinced that in the next 10 to 15 years, we will see serious developments in this sector. We will step by step move away from land-based travel, also on short distance flights towards a, for example, connections such as Graz, Vienna, which is an important one because I would like to see you more often, Daniel. This is our personal kind of, the lack of being able to hug each other is reflected in compliments. So there's already companies out there, and the big players are jumping on this topic step by step. This is gonna be, in terms of mobility, this is gonna be the most important thing for the next decade. Yeah.
Now, just kind of looking into the glass ball, obviously air travel as of now is taking a huge hit. We can see international airlines going down in the stock markets. We can see products like Zoom going up in the stock market like crazy. How long is that going to take? What's your take on this? That's a lot of takes in one sentence, I know.
First question is because there's 2. The personal air travel is going to pick up, is activated right now. This because this is not getting into a huge plane with a hell of a lot of people, but just with you and your family. There is a market also right now. The large airline players are certainly looking at the lost decade. This is going to be more serious than the situation after 9/11, which lasted only for a few weeks. we've basically brought the problem is the biggest industry, the world's biggest industry, the tourism industry, is connected to the airline sector. So this is not too much. It's not going to be too much fun. We're going to crunch a bit for about a decade, I think. Don't let me, for the startup sector, everything is fine. For the general economy, it's quite dire because, as I said, tourism is the most important, globally the most important sector, and it's very closely connected.
So do you think, just out of interest, that will mean that probably this whole sector is going to be sped up? Because you're right. I mean, I haven't thought about it too much, but obviously no one wants to get into big aeroplanes anymore. Like everyone's like, no, let's social distance. Don't want to be in a tube with 300 people for 6 hours. So still people will want to travel. Will this really speed up innovation in this sector?
I'm pretty certain. Also, the shared ownership structure is going to speed up this sector, because it will be up to a large degree electric propulsion concepts. This is going to be cleaner and greener. You will not need to buy these systems. They will be used 24 hours. They will be kind of autopiloted in a proper autopilot sense. I'm absolutely certain that this is going to make a serious difference. I mean, the classic air travel is going to pick up as well, but it's going to take quite a while. We will, as non-industry related players, we will not see the trouble. But after 9/11, it was 10 years. The pilots are still shaking about these 10 years because it was so hard to find good jobs back then. Wages were down. Everything was quite serious.
So very quick question. If someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out?
Our partners at Podim can connect you. The great team at Science Park, which should receive at this point great thanks. www.sciencepark.at. Just contact us, and we'll do whatever we can. Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us, Martin. It's been a pleasure. Hope to see you soon. Stay safe, my friend, and bye-bye. Thank you. So, thank you very much. So we've talked technology, we've talked society, we've talked collaboration. Now let's move on to the next topic, and that's mobility. And right up next, we have a gentleman who's the CEO and co-founder of a startup called GLEAM. It's got something to do with 3 wheels and electrified mobility. I'm not going to tell you anymore. Let's roll the intro. You'll find out what it's all about. And here he is. Welcome to our stage, Mario Eibl. Hello, Mario. How are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thanks. How are you today?
I'm good. Happy to see you. And my friend, the stage is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Mario Eibl, one of the founders of GLEAM. And also thank you for the previous talk. I think it was interesting. And he laid out the future for my talk, which is about urban mobility. I'm not going to talk only about my company, of course. I want to give you a short overview on what's called the future of mobility. The future of mobility is already in discussion for hundreds of years. We always try to look into the future. So I'm going to take a look into that, what challenges we have in the cities right now. I'm not going to focus on mobility on a global stage, but more on the city level. Why do we need change, and what are the opportunities there for startups? Yes, already a while back, everybody knows Back to the Future. There were many ideas how we will be transported, how we will move forward in cities in the future. Will it be hoverboards? Yes, you can build hoverboards now. I think some companies try to do that. I especially like the idea from an Italian newspaper from the 60s, and they all tried to put us into some kind of bubbles on 4 wheels, And I think that looks great and might be our future, but already like 60, 70 years ago, they thought about how will the future look like? And of course, there always was, when you take a look on how the future of mobility looks like, something in the air. You don't want to stay down, as the previous speech was about, like, how do we defy gravity? How do we get up into the air? I especially like this one, like airplanes together with some kind of personal mobility. So it's always like the future of mobility always was about how do we get ourselves into the air and use not only the space on the ground, but also the air surrounding us. We also have the same today. How is the future looking in the future? And mobility is always about these kind of pods. You are in a bubble, you're in a closed environment, and you need to move around in safe space. The only green you see here in this future of mobility is maybe here on the ground where people can walk across these kind of bubbled four-wheel vehicles. So this could be the future. But when we talk about future, then where do we stand today? I think we need always to ground ourselves and be realistic. What is the status of today? And we have done all of the research. You don't need to see all of these pictures. You can trust me, there's not one solution worldwide. So if we talk about urban mobility, of course, you always have to relate what country, what continent. I think Lagos in Africa is a mega city, and the mobility there is totally different than for Oslo or for New York City or maybe Texas cities like Houston. You always have to relate when you talk about the future of mobility, in which city do you have what kind of solutions today? And basically you have two-wheelers, four-wheelers, three-wheelers. And to be honest, we were super excited about in our research that we have done is that in almost all of these countries, the car is only one part of the whole game. So basically, I tried to summarize what kind of differences are there all over the world in terms of mobility. I already talked about do we have mobility on the ground or air mobility? Do we transport people or do we transport goods? Is it more public or mass transportation or private transportation? Is it an owned vehicle or is it a shared vehicle? And as I said, a mass vehicle or more for the individuals. So I think there are several levels when we talk about mobility, which you always need to consider when you talk about mobility. And I think that is super important, and it cannot go into all of the details today, but definitely one of the most important parts in urban mobility is how do we use the space properly? And as you can see here, already in the 70s, the car was a dominant factor in our cities, but we only limited to a certain space. Cities are growing tremendously. The biggest solution, of course, for individual transport, for people transport, is the public transportation in cities. But I'm not going too deep into this today. I'm really looking more forward to what are the startup opportunities, because everything else is, in my opinion, you need a little bit more money than you have as a startup. When you look at a startup, you always focus on the customer. This is a graph where you see the quality of life over the cost of living. And I think it's important when you try to develop a new product for urban mobility solution, you always have to focus on how can you increase the quality of life, but also how can you reduce the cost of living? And that means reduce the cost of transportation. Why is there such a difference? For example, I am living right now in the city of Vienna, who is in the studies of Moessler always on top of the quality of life in the city. But on a second place, or quite after, there's Zurich. But the big difference is the cost of living. Of course, there's always the cost of the income. You also have to compare. But when you want a solution for a city, in my opinion, these are two important factors. How can you increase the quality of life for a city? And also, how can you make it as cheap as possible for the citizens? Coming back to a little bit more data, already in this speech before, we were talking about a rising worldwide population. We were about almost 7 billion people in 2010, and will grow now to over 8 billion people, and soon reach 9, or as the previous talk mentioned, 12 billion people. But what is not increasing is the people living in a rural environment, in the countryside. Only the cities are increasing. So we are already over 50% are now living in cities. We're gonna have soon 2/3 of the worldwide population is living in cities. So it's not a minor topic, urban transportation. Also, as you can see, it will almost triple in the next 40 years, the urban mobility demand. And if you triple something, of course, that has a lot of challenges for a city. From the environmental side, what is the chaos in the traffic? How many traffic jams do you get? Is it secure for all the citizens? The infrastructure will be overloaded. There are limited parking spaces or limited spaces at all. But there are a lot of challenges, but as we know from the startup language, challenges are always opportunities. On the other side, you see also here, there will be a lot of investments necessary, and there will be done a lot of investments, especially in cities, in the mobility sector. Yes, there will be investments in all the other sectors as well, but there's an increased investment from city governments into the mobility segment. So that's also an important factor for these challenges and opportunities when you build a mobility startup in the urban environment. But what is the automotive industry doing? Have you ever wondered, in my opinion, when I look at a car advertisement and it involves a city, it's always at night, mostly it's raining, and mostly it looks like this. There's no traffic and it looks nice. You have the vehicle, you don't see the driver, but the vehicle is in the center. Because what they don't want to show, of course, is this. This is the reality. This is how LA works during nighttime, especially Christmas time or vacation times. The city is a constant car traffic jam, especially in the United States. And of course, you can't use that for advertisements. How do we solve that? And the solution always was, let's build another car lane. Let's build the second, the third, the fourth car lane. And it didn't really solve the problem. There's another big problem from the car industry. We have a lot of emissions, not only on the local basis, but of course on a global basis. We're going to take a look on the statistics. Again, what you hear in the media normally are the people dying in road deaths. This is really bad. It's about 1.3 million people die every year because of road accidents, but you don't hear so much about the air pollution topic. And this is especially bad also when you think about the global level in the Western Pacific region, in Southeast Asia. And so you really have to find a solution there as well. And I really like that graphic from a graphic designer who used the actual data about we have to flatten the curve for the COVID crisis, also to see, well, we have more challenges ahead of us. And this is climate change. So not only the emissions we have on a local level, but also on a global emission level. And of course, normally in startup pitches, you don't lose slides with a lot of data in it. But I've seen, especially in the discussion we have right now with Corona crisis, you have to bring in science to the table. And science is clear on that topic. And that's why I need to go a little bit more into the depths of this. Global warming is a factor where 97% of the scientists agree on that we as humans are responsible to solve this, because we emitted too much CO2 over the last time. So this is our challenge ahead, which of course influences the urban mobility factor. Because when you look at transportation, 15% of the global CO2 emissions come from transportation. So this is another challenge we have to accept when we talk about mobility solutions. This is kind of the roadmap which we should have when we try to reduce road transport in the EU. How do we reduce emissions in the urban environment? But how do we solve that? I think governments, the first step, what you do is they build up regulation about this. They build up low emission zones, urban road tolls, so they try to limit the traffic from a legal standpoint. And of course, I think that's an important factor, because otherwise everybody will drive with their big truck into the city. But of course, as startups, you always try to bring new, exciting products or services to the market. And I think on that topic, we really have to work together as startups and with the governments to find solutions together for that. For an example, London now was talking for the last couple of years, implementing ultra low emission zones in certain areas. I think on this, what I showed before, this is more the overview, what you see on the European level, what happens, but this is more on a city level. What really happens is that you either have to pay to go to a city center, or you have to pay a fine if you don't comply to the government regulations on emissions. But what are now the solutions? What are the opportunities for us as startups here? Finally, we will get air transportation. The dream of the past is really already in the making. A great company from Munich, Lilium, they built, as one example, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. So basically we have our flying cars, which we dreamed about for a long time. And I really love their vision that they say you can fly anywhere, anytime, and we're really close to that. Still, we're close to it. It's not there yet, but still, I mean, it looks amazing, and I can't wait to do a test fly in this one. The other big opportunity in the market of transportation is, of course, the autonomous vehicles. I don't know if you already heard about autonomous vehicles. Just to briefly give you an overview, we have several levels there, from level 0 to level 5. And level 5 basically means you don't need a driver in the vehicle anymore. The vehicle drives completely itself. And as you can see here, there's a timeline which always moves a little bit more to the right. On top, the latest stage which you will achieve is driverless city driving, because city driving is really a complex topic for computer. You have a lot of data you need to focus on. And that's why also here you see autonomous highway driving will come before that, because it's not as complex as city driving. So still the automotive industry is really pushing hard to put also autonomous vehicles into our cities. But to be honest, does that really solve the problems we were talking about? I mean, the car, as we have seen at the beginning, uses a lot of space. Also does the electric car. I'm still a fan of electric cars. But also the autonomous electric car will use the same kind of space if you don't change anything on the vehicle side. But to be honest, coming back to the vision from the 60s, I think there's no startup out there building smaller vehicles right now. Why is nobody thinking about, let's say, one-seater pod with a big screen? We have a great internet connection in there. And if you can go in there, it doesn't have to be a vehicle, a car. And I'm still waiting for that startup that builds something like this. And I hope it will be more comfortable than what we see in the vision of the 60s. But I was really curious why no startup out there is tapping into that market. Maybe because nobody wants to sit in a bubble. And honestly, I don't know if that's really the future, especially now. I don't know how you feel about the coronavirus, but when I sit at home too much, I fear that this is the future that the movie WALL-E created, that we only sit in our pods and get driven around and don't move. Of course, I think it's an opportunity, and I think you can work in an autonomous vehicle, as I do now in the subway, but I also want to stay healthy. And when you look again in the past, there was one big solution in mega cities, and it was the bicycle. Bicycle was always there next to everything else, and you stay fit, you stay healthy. The city can use a lot more bicycles. So this was already a big solution in the past, but is it also a big solution in the future? Why is the bicycle or a light electric vehicle really a big factor? If you already look again on the data and you split all of your trips, and this is an example of car trip distance in the United States, we always talk about like the big range factors, but there's many of these trips you do are really in the short trip distance. And let's say, and these are 1 or 2 miles, or let's say up to 5 kilometers. And in this let's say in this market, in this use case, you always can use a bicycle. You always can easily drive from A to B with the bike, because 5 kilometers, that's nothing. And that's also why also in China, in Asia, in the rest of the world, the bike market came back, but not as an ownership, but really as the bike sharing market. We started off, of course, with the station-based bike sharing, which was a pretty great invention. I know a team from Vienna who was at the forefront in this market. And then later on with new technologies where you can lock and unlock, find your vehicle with the smartphone. This was a huge opportunity, and it spread out all over the world. To be honest, I don't really know why it failed. I know there's a redistribution model, and I think this is also the part of the startup world. You have to try, you have to fail, but of course, we hope that we don't fail in this way. What took over that market was in the last couple of years, let's say in the last 3 years, really, the scooter sharing. It's the same principle. You search with your phone a vehicle, you unlock the vehicle, and you drive a short distance. And this was like US companies like Gerd or LIME, or in Europe, Boy or Meteor, they really boomed in the last couple of years, and they have a steeper curve, how many rides were driven with these vehicles than Uber or Lyft together. And you see here, there's a huge industry behind that. So when we talk about micromobility, which means basically everything that is not a car, that is lightweight and for short distance, then there's a growing number of companies for scooters, for bicycles, and of course, then you need the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. You need many other tools in the tech stack. And so this was really a boom, let's say, in the last couple of years, not only in the shared space, but also in the own space. So many new startups came up and built their own vehicles for this micromobility last mile market. But also, as I said before, cities need to be there for the citizens. And my impression is that cities don't really need driverless cars, they need more carless drivers. And I have 2 kids as well. I think it's important when you grow up in a city, you need to be able to drive yourself. You don't want to sit in a pod, be driven around like a 4-wheeled car, but the feeling of driving your own bicycle is really something that is there for almost now 200 years. And I think it will stay for the next at least 200 years, because it's such a great experience, and it's perfect, the future of mobility for an urban environment, that everybody's able to drive themselves. And also now with new technologies coming in, like the electric engine, better batteries, you see really that the bike market is booming. Here you see compared the e-bike market versus the electric car market. And I think that's a good visual where you can see that a lot of investment is going into the car industry, but honestly, the bike market is more booming. I don't know where the time is. Can someone tell me about how many minutes I have left, or you just cut me off? I will talk a little bit more about otherwise what's happening now with the coronavirus. A lot is moving online, and I think if you Google, for example, what's happening in the mobility space, then you go to that website of google.com COVID-19 mobility, you see what's happening in Corona times, how the mobility was decreased over the last couple of weeks. And what's happening is cities are transforming now within a couple of weeks. They get rid of the car lanes, they build up pop-up bike lanes. And if you take a look at big cities like, again, what's happening in London is to try to be one of the world's largest car-free zones in central London. So you see really a trend in urban mobility that the car is getting more and more banished from the cities. And we had the same more and more in the commerces, also moving online. We had that already before coronavirus crisis, which is now almost doubled again in size. There's a lot of goods transportation needed as well, not only personal transportation. And I think this is an important factor which you need to solve also in the future. The especially on-demand market is booming there. And the way we see it at GLEAM is that you can use also a bicycle for that kind of purpose in an urban environment. And that's why we at GLEAM have built electric cargo bikes. Just to show you a short insight, we use that dynamic tilting technology on our vehicles. So we have created out of the micromobility market and the light electric vehicles, a combination where you can also use that for the transportation of goods. And our vision there is that you build a vehicle that can go 50 kilometers an hour on the street and 30 on the bike lane. And I think the cities are ready for new kind of vehicles there. So I want you to develop together with us new versions of a future mobility for the people that is healthy, that is green, that is fast from A to B, so you don't get stuck in traffic jams. And of course, it's fun to ride. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mario, for your insights. Thank you very much for that. Now, there is an audience question, and the question is, how will the next car look like? Or better, the means of transportations for long distances being at least 700 kilometers in one direction. How's that going to look like?
I'm not sure if I can talk about this. The topic is about urban mobility. My impression is long distance, there are several opportunities. There is, for example, the Hyperloop discussion where you are in the tube and go for several hundred kilometers an hour in the tube, like in the airplane, but on the ground. I think that's an opportunity, but there are many solutions that need to, many problems in that technology that needs to be solved. I think airplanes for long distance are also super important, but they of course need to go electric. And I think also autonomous cars on the highway in an electric version for the long distance are a good solution.
Now, time is flying, so maybe a short answer on this. Do you think that the current crisis is amplifying the adoption of new means of transportation currently?
Yes, I totally think that. Not only new means, but as I said, also the old ones like bicycles. But this is now increased. You see that over the last couple of weeks.
Okay. Last question is, can you give us some numbers or tractions? At what point are you right now with GLEAM?
We started production on our bikes now in May, beginning of May. We start shipping right now. We have done over the last couple of years a lot of R&D, but we are happy now to bring our product on the market. Now we try to fulfill all our orders. And we will reach a traction of about 500 bikes this year and try to scale as much as possible next year.
Marvelous. Thank you very much for joining us, Mario. It's been a pleasure. Stay safe and see you soon. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Now we're moving on to our final topic. After technology, society, collaboration, and mobility, now we're going to talk identity. Now, the next gentleman, I could fill the next 20 minutes what he's done, so I'll just give you 2 or 3 tidbits. He's invested in little-known startups such as Twitter and Square. He was actually one of the initial investors and advisors. He's also an expert on anything around the topics of identity and neutral and portable identity. If you go like, what does that mean? You might want to listen closely. The topic of the talk is called Europe as Center for Digital Identity. And before you meet Gerd Kidd, let's roll the intro. And here he is, Gerd Kidd. Welcome to our stage. Happy to meet you.
Thank you for the introduction. Can everybody hear me well now?
Perfectly clear, and the stage is yours.
Very good. And I'm here in California, but I want to talk about like why Europe, and in particular Slovenia, might be the future for identity. I came to Slovenia originally with the Bitcoin boom with Bitstamp and GateHub. I also worked at Ripple as the chief risk officer. Thank you for the introductions on the Twitter and Square background. Those aren't really technological revolutions, and what I'm going to talk to today isn't really about technology. It's about a change it's really a political change. It's a change about access and who should be in charge of identity. I'm going to give some examples of solutions from around the world from different companies and countries, and why I think those might be chilling outcomes that we may not want, and why we might be onto something here in Europe, and in particular, the work that's being done in Slovenia may be a model for identity that I think is a future that we want rather than one that we want to avoid. By way of background, some of the other identity models in the world today that already have a lot of traction actually are hinged around messaging companies, not other types of digital wallets, not governments, but companies like WeChat, Telegram, Facebook, which have hundreds of millions or billions of users, are de facto identity systems today. In China with WeChat, sorry, I'm getting a feedback loop. Is everyone hearing me okay, or without the echo? That's great now. So in China, the identity solution is a messaging system that has no encryption, has a lot of surveillance. It's very effective within China, but it's an Orwellian concept that really traps people in a system where they do not have privacy. That is one model. Another model has been, we might call it a Mad Max model, has been with Telegram. Telegram has a very popular messaging system. They were going to introduce a currency called Tron. They got in a tangle with the SEC over whether their instrument and whether the levels of identity and the way they were going to sell it was acceptable, and they've actually pulled back. So Telegram might be considered a sort of a Mad Max approach to how they were going to do things. They were going to thumb their nose at the authorities, and that is actually broken down. So that's blocked as being too Mad Max-like in terms of its distribution and usage model. A third model out of Facebook and with WhatsApp, we might call that the creepy Facebook model. It's a model where trust Facebook at a time when really nobody trusts Facebook, and everyone knows that a tremendous number of the identities in Facebook are fake identities. Okay? So all of those approaches are problematic. I call it Orwellian China Mad Max Telegram and creepy Facebook. So Europe has an approach that's been grounded in GDPR. And that's an idea that is more about user-centric, with users actually being able to choose who they want to share data with. It's a relatively bureaucratic approach. It involves a lot of oversight, a lot of regulation. It also involves a lot of sharing of your private information. You get to choose who to share with, but you're still sharing the data all over the place. And so the question is, and the solution that's being worked on in Slovenia today, that I think could be a model for the future, is a form of identity that is what we call self-sovereign. It's a form of identity where instead of sharing your information with everyone, you develop a reputation, something that can be shared on a zero knowledge proof basis. And by that, I mean, you can share and prove things. It might be that you're old enough to, just want to make sure, is everyone still hearing me? Is the presentation working okay? All right, I will keep going. I'm assuming that I'm getting through. So with this zero knowledge proof method, you're able to share, for instance, that you're over 18 if you're buying, or over 21 if you're buying alcohol, or if you've had a vaccination, or you have a negative test for the virus, or you have antibodies. You're able to prove all those things without having to give up your actual identity or private information about your identity. You can prove the thing about yourself. The way we're going about working on this with the globaliD team is following a model that came from the internet at the time that it moved from just TCP/IP to the World Wide Web. The key innovation then was not technological, it was linguistic. There was the creation of the domain name system, a system that gave every website everywhere in the world a unique name. So you were able to navigate that without having to know the technical gobbledygook underneath. It's the innovation that allowed the internet to move from being for governments and academic institutions to being for businesses and people. And so what we're suggesting now is that instead of companies like Facebook, WeChat, or Telegram being kind of the America Online or CompuServe or other big top-down siloed organizations, there needs to be a World Wide Web-like protocol for identity. And the way that would work, much like the domain name system, is there would be an identity name system, which means that every individual, every entity, including all companies, have unique names. You can have more than one name, but no two people or businesses could have the same name. And once you have that name, you collect verifications, basically proofs about your identity to that name, and you collect them. They're not held by a central organization. And with those proofs, you can go and do the things you need to do in life that normally you have to rely on a top-down company or government to do. And that means proving your identity for things like medical records, voting, digital wallets, all the things that we do in everyday life. And so the team at globaliD, working mostly out of Ljubljana, is working on that project. If that project comes to be, then we can live in a future that I think is more like the Star Trek reality, where it doesn't matter where you go in the universe, everybody can buy those dilithium crystals that power all the spaceships. It doesn't matter whether you're a Romulan or a Cleon or from the Federation. There was a globally, actually intergalactically workable system for proving your identity, and in that case, having like credits. They figured out how to do money in the future on a distributed basis that worked at an intergalactic level. Now, we never saw the episode that explained how that happened. The work of globaliD is to make that infrastructure possible and real today. So with that, I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to ask for questions from the audience. Happy to talk more, but we do think that there is an alternative. We do think that it will be Europe, and in particular, Slovenia based, and that just as Slovenia was like a leader for the blockchain industry with Bitstamp, there's another chance for Slovenia to take leadership within Europe and for Europe to take leadership within the world and provide an alternative we think is much more robust than what we see from WeChat, Telegram, or Facebook. So let me pause for a moment there. Questions from the audience? Hello? Sure.
Is it off?
Did we get clipped off?
We are
there?
back. Sorry, that was a bit ahead of times. Sorry about that. I was expecting you to talk a little bit longer.
Oh,
We are back,
I
and
can
right
keep
now
going,
is the
but I would
time where
like
we
you a
can
chance.
ask questions from the audience. So, dear audience, if you have questions, just shoot them in anytime. So, let's see if we have some first. Thank you very much. Let's see if we can have some first audience questions popping in. Greg, we were just talking backstage a little bit about your super early investments in both Twitter and Square. How did that come along? I know it's not the main topic, but I'm just super curious.
Well, sure. So we had built a company called Dispatch Management Services, which did dispatching for messengers all around the world, one center per city. And in that, instead of telling people what to do, we let the couriers bid like an auction, bottom up, for work. From that, we learned about text messages and payments. A young hacker named Jack Dorsey hacked into that system to show our weaknesses. He came to work there. He was very interested in global dispatch. And so Jack came to live with me. And so it was very easy to be involved in Twitter because Jack was living in the backyard and it was what Jack was working on. And so instead of dispatching short messages to bike messengers, Twitter just dispatched messages about anything and anyone could follow them, just rather than just bike messenger. So that was the beginning of Twitter. And I'm not a founder. I'm just the guy that put milk in the fridge. That's really all on Jack and the team at Twitter, but I did get to invest and I did to help out early on. Same thing with Square. Just further on, I did have a background in payments. I came from the Federal Reserve, worked in the payments group there where we run the wire transfer and the ACH system for the United States. And so when Jack was starting Square, it made sense for me to be the early risk advisor there. So helps to know the right people. It was great to get to know like Nate's from Bitstamp and NA from GateHub in Slovenia. And so just being in the right place at the right time, kind of like Forrest Gump, makes these
That's a
possible.
very humble approach, Greg. That's very humble. Now we've got.
It works a lot better. Okay.
But I'm liking that a lot. I mean, that's probably one of the most humble answers on that. It's a bit like Forrest Gump. Yeah. I'm liking that. So here's an audience question.
Sure.
So the question is, I'm always worried about legislation and regulation when it comes to ID. Will this solution apply to local legal requests?
So the idea of globaliD is it's like an Easter egg hunt. You go out and you collect these proofs. So whatever the proofs are in a local jurisdiction, it's just a question of you round tripping and getting those things cryptographically signed. And so whether it's Twilio for your mobile phone number, whether it's the local motor vehicle department for a driver's license. So we don't set and we don't do the verifications. We're the protocol as to how they're written. And so we expect this to be used and we're using it and signing up and including people all over the world. And so, again, we're neutral. We're not saying what the proofs of identity should be. We just state and show how they can be written down. So this can be hyper local. That's very much the focus here.
How does this work in parallel or instead of an eID as regulation is the next audience question.
So you mean an electronic ID? So one of the verifications
Correct.
you can get, we work with, and we're a customer of identity companies like Authentics out of Israel or Onfido or any of the other companies that are basically OCRing and taking pictures and validating the security features on government IDs, whether they're driver's licenses, passports, or other forms of ID, that's just one more form of identity you collect alongside things like round tripping your phone number through Twilio, or your biometric, or your social media accounts, or you can go out and get vouchers from your friends or people that you work at. All of these are methods of collection. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. So what you're collecting is what you need to get into that nightclub or get on that airplane or open that account. But the point is, who holds that information is you. You can have a backup in a vault that you can use again and again. So instead of today having a company that collects that information and you belong to the company, think about this like the day when it used to be when you changed phone companies, you had to get a new phone number because the phone companies owned the phone numbers. Nowadays, you own your phone number and the phone companies service your phone number. We're doing the same with all the identity credentials. So if you get a credential, whether it's your government ID, or it could be your credential that you graduated from university, the credential is given to you, not given to each company or other university that you apply to. You have it and you can convey it. That's the key difference here. It's bottom up. And so your driver's license is yours. We want to put that in a form that you always have on your phone, backed up in the cloud, and you can convey that information. Or more importantly, you can convey a zero knowledge proof. You can prove that you are a resident of a certain country or you're over a certain age without having to like give up your private information. And that includes driver's licenses as well.
Thank you. Now there's the next question. That's a very straightforward question. I'm liking these kind of questions as well. Are you also in talks with any of the Slovenian telcos about the ID solutions?
So telcos are, we already use the telcos. So one of the things we did, and again, when I was at, my job at Twitter was to like interface with the 600 telcos. And because there was like no way I could interface with 600 telcos, it was all just APIs. It was the equivalent of Twilio before there was Twilio. And the same thing that happens here, like with the telcos, we're getting and letting people prove that they control a particular mobile phone number. And so we don't actually have to talk to those phone companies. Now, the interesting question is, once people have credentials, like round trip their phone number or have shown that they are like attached to a particular government ID, would phone companies be willing to let people hold digital wallets based on those credentials without making them go through another verification process? If we use the same forms of verification that telephone companies use, the mobile companies, and have those cryptographically written down, why should a user have to reestablish their identity? They should just be able to pass those credentials and get whatever rights or privileges a phone company can provide. We are pushing the phone companies to be more M-Pesa-like, to be an alternative to banks. Part of our financial inclusion effort, which is that everybody in the world obviously can have a name, there's no limit to names, that the simplest way for people to have an account and have access is through a mobile phone or just knowing someone who has a mobile phone. So we're pushing the phone companies all the time. I have to say though, phone companies are still kind of clinging to their old business model of like making money from selling SMS, text messaging, and other relatively mundane, lame things, which is why they're not more of an agent of financial inclusion around the world. They also are quite possessive of trying to get people to have an identity that, once again, works just within their phone network. And so we are actually integrated with the phone networks, but I call those passive integrations, where we don't really need to ask permission. We already just interoperate with them because they can't really stop us from.
Okay. I like the way you said they're lame. Yeah, but it kind of makes sense. And yes, some are going to be happy to be selling SMS until the demands finally goes away, and others just might want to think a step ahead. Now, here's a question. Do you have development studios around Europe? Is the next audience question.
So yeah, so we think identity is the permission to act. So identity just in the abstract is not that interesting. It's what you can do with it. And because whether you're a communist or a capitalist, we all live in exchange societies. I want an identity that's strong enough that I can have a digital wallet and spend it where I want to spend it. So while we're doing the pure identity piece in Ljubljana, we're doing the the piece for giving everyone digital wallets, that once you have an identity, you automatically have a digital wallet and can hold any fiat currency, crypto, commodity, and we're adding equities as well. That's being done out of our design team and development team in Braga, Portugal. And then issuing virtual and physical cards is being done out of Barcelona in Spain. And so all of our development work is actually in Europe. The identity piece is led out of, like as I said, out of Ljubljana, and then the Portugal and Spain pieces too. We're just doing, it's a lot easier. You might be Forrest Gump, but it's a lot easier to raise money here in Silicon Valley. And so I've been lazy with like Twitter, Square, Ripple, Coinbase, all those companies. That was the old way of like raising and making money. But our new way, we think the talent is distributed all over the world. And we think the key thing about Europe, in Europe, privacy is a human right. In America, privacy is something you can sign away with the terms of use, or really what I call the terms of abuse. And so when it comes to this very, very privacy-centric concept, Europe is a better place culturally and philosophically than currently right now the United States or China, but still have to do the work. But yes, all of our main R&D is not in Silicon Valley, it is all in Europe.
I love that approach. Questions are actually pouring in now. So there's two more I'd like to ask,
Sure.
if time permits. Now, I like the idea of being identified anonymously. Do we also share the date while being identified? Is that required?
Which date? The date of?
I'm not sure. That's kind of an audience question. I'm assuming maybe the date as of like today, time stamping or something like that.
So time is important because one concept of identity is duration. So one thing when you have an identity, you might want to share like how long that identity has been persistent. In fact, one of the definitions of identity is it's something that doesn't change that much over time. But the other flip side of identity is how current are your credentials. And so you might have a credential that comes from a government ID, but it might be expired. So timestamping and dates, or what we call diachronic proofing, is very important. Like the key insight, like at Twitter, like Eric Schmidt called Twitter when we were at Twitter, he said, well, that's just poor man's email. And at the time, what he didn't understand was that Google was great as what we call authoritative search. It was found the most authoritative topic. But if you wanted the most relevant one for breaking news, you had to have Twitter because timestamps mattered. And I used to be teased when I worked at the Federal Reserve because and then the other regulators because I'd invested in Twitter. And they said, well, that company, it doesn't have any, not only does it not have any profits, it doesn't have any revenue. And one day I came in and they were always teasing me about it. And I said, well, I got good news and bad news. And they said, because they're regulators, they said, well, what's the bad news? I said, well, we only have 2 customers. And then they said, well, what's the good news? I said, well, it's Google and Microsoft. They bought the feed because without that feed, Google for their search and Microsoft for Bing, they couldn't figure out what breaking news was. So they needed to buy the fire hose. And so time stamping for certain things, knowing when something was signed cryptographically, is really important for building your risk and compliance models because we don't decide. So time stamping is a critical thing for like knowing how current a verification is. You still don't have to give away what your phone number is, what your email address is, what your physical address is, to know that they've been validated and validated recently by a trusted source. It is a Tony Soprano world. What does that mean? It means that at the end of the day, it's not about privacy or security. Those are means. What we're trying to get to is trust. And when Joey says, hey, Joey's okay because Sammy says Joey's okay, that's what really matters. Who do you trust that stands behind the credential? Just like the old-fashioned letters of introduction before there was technology, who signed those letters of introduction matters, and when they were signed matters. So that's a long answer for timestamping matters because it helps us understand how to take risk in a reasoned manner.
But it was a very valuable answer, and you gave us some insights. And I was never aware that Eric Schmidt had once referred to Twitter as the poor man's email.
Poor man's email.
I'm liking that. Thank you very much for sharing these insights, Greg. It's been a pleasure. There's several more questions pouring in, but obviously, dear audience, opportunity is always a thing. It comes along. There's a small time frame where things work, and sometimes it doesn't work. So be quicker asking questions, and you'll be the next. Greg, it's been a pleasure to meeting you. Thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sharing all these insights. Thank you so much. Stay safe and speak to you soon. Thank you, and bye-bye.
I'll see you in Ljubljana.
Looking forward to that.
Bye-bye.
So, the first segment of today is coming to an end, and we've spoken about several different topics. We talked about Disruptions 360, and that included technology, society, collaboration, mobility, and identity. We were given some quite fascinating insights, and a lot of them showed us that Europe, as of right now, is in a very, very potentially exciting position. Right now, there's a lot of opportunity out there. But as we said today quite a few times, with opportunity comes responsibility. All of you have that responsibility, some of you more, some of you less, but we have someone coming up quite shortly who has a lot of that responsibility on her shoulder. Don't want to give away too much, but what I want to do is hand over the stage to the Maribor studio, over to Judith.